Hello ladies and gentlemen. Before the video starts, I'd like to raise awareness on a friend's GoFundMe. Her family restaurant has been going through some hard times and I thought I could help them by raising awareness for it on my own channel. A link to it will be provided in the description. Please donate any amount of money you want or spread awareness for it however you can. I'm not asking for much, just to give a moment of your time to help them out. Any form of help would be deeply appreciated. Thank you.
Got more than enough fight left in me for you, boy.
Come on, kid! Concentrate! Use your head! Alright! Not bad, kid!
Not exactly what I had in mind, but not bad.
Back in 2021, the superhero genre was shook by the arrival of the Amazon Prime series Invincible, a show based on the comic series created by Robert Kirkman. What started off as a pretty basic story about the responsibilities of being a superhero quickly became one of the most shocking, groundbreaking, thought-provoking, revolutionary, and beloved shows of all time. Following a string of mysterious murders, Mark becomes a crime fighter under the close eye of his father, Nolan, champion of an alien race known as the Viltrumites. Little does he know that Nolan is the one responsible for killing the Guardians of the Globe, and it was all part of his plan to prepare Earth for the conquest of the Viltrum Empire. After a harsh battle between father and son, Nolan can't bring himself to continue his mission and disappears into the unknown. With the threat of the Empire looming over them, Mark and his allies must prepare themselves and fight to protect the planet from threats both on and off-world, in the hope of being ready for the Viltrum Empire. The series was quickly picked up and praised by millions, not just for being well written, but for breathing new life into a genre that was starting to grow stale and generic. The characters are fantastic, the fight scenes are creative, the storylines are well put together, the voice acting is solid, and its violent content never gets too gritty or badly placed in the universe. With the tone the series establishes, they had more freedom to experiment with the violence, allowing for a certain amount of gore without being gratuitous or edgy, and the first season ended on a hugely impactful and fulfilling conclusion. It deeply explores Nolan's inner conflict with himself, the struggle of choosing between his home planet and the new life he built on Earth. It develops Mark into a very likable protagonist, a hero going through a coming-of-age story while learning the full responsibility of being a superhero. It introduced an ensemble of interesting and complex characters who all tie into the plot pretty well. And with the promise of a deeper story with more stakes on the horizon, everyone was in anticipation of what would come next. And my reaction to most of it has been pretty cool. I'm not trying to say the show is in decline or that it's starting to become bad, but there's something about season 2 and 3 that just lacked that oomph that season 1 had. I've taken the time to check them out, and for what it's worth, it's continuing the story pretty well while staying faithful to the comics. It explores Nolan's existential crisis and how he has to come to terms with the reality of what he's done, seeking redemption for his misdeeds but not exactly knowing how. Debbie goes through a lot as she comes to terms with the reality that her entire marriage was based on a lie. Heartbroken and depressed while also finding hope in raising Mark to be a better person than Nolan. It expands the story by building up on things that happened in season 1, exploring how people are recovering from Omni-Man's rampage with Mark and Debbie trying to cope with what happened. Even some of the new Guardians are given pretty good character arcs, with Rex being the best one. I won't spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but it's a very well-written storyline with an enjoyably bittersweet conclusion. Overall, seasons 2 and 3 are very satisfying to watch as they stay true to what made season 1 so incredible, especially in its use of subversion. Invincible is a series that takes the comic book superhero genre and turns it upside down in a way we've never seen before. It's such a breath of fresh air with the way it takes the usual tropes and cliches we've come to expect from it and do something inventive and new. It explores really gray areas and the morality of the characters. We see more of what drives them and how they can change their ideologies in the face of a big enough threat. The character relations, the chemistry they use to work off each other, it's a highly engaging cast that gets more interesting the deeper we delve into the story. But there's also been a couple of boring things in these 2 seasons. For one thing, the relationship between Monster Girl and Robot isn't particularly interesting. It comes across as creepy when you think about the unfortunate implications behind Robot's actions, and even then there's no interesting connection between the two. Robot or Rudy just comes across as really unsettling, and the fact that everyone is just hand-waving it away as something that will go away by itself is incredibly stupid. As someone who looked through the comics and knows what he ends up doing later, which I won't spoil for those who prefer to just watch the show, it just makes everyone look like an idiot. There's also this really stupid nonsensical episode where a guy wants Invincible to be punished for something that was 100% not his fault. He spends the entire episode victim blaming Mark when he knows what actually happened. I don't even feel sorry for him because his motivations are so so petty and backwards, and an entire episode is wasted on trying to make this idiot tragic and sympathetic. It's a waste of time because no one in their right mind would ever want Mark to be put on trial because he's a victim of Nolan's abuse. He did everything in his power to stop him and it was televised for everyone to see. You have to be a sorry person to be a more detestable character than Amber. At least she came to the realization her relationship with Mark was doomed to failure and they ended it on good terms. And the less I say about these two, the better. But a bigger problem with these 2 seasons is that it feels like the show is starting to lean into more predictable territory with how it uses certain tropes, like the introduction of a multiverse. Season 1 was really special because it completely avoided all the usual plot development and cliches associated with the superhero genre. It wasn't just about the responsibility of being a superhero or saving the world from a threat. It was about exploring the humanity of someone who spent their entire life being influenced by a totalitarian dictatorship, and how he was capable of changing for the better. It was a more human and down-to-earth experience compared to something we've seen in thousands of Marvel and DC stories. But now it's doing that exact kind of thing which makes these newer seasons less special. The introduction of a multiverse, reviving dead characters, boyfriend and girlfriend drama, political figures doing shady things in the name of the greater good. It makes seasons 2 and 3 feel less special when season 1 was so vitalizing and rejuvenating. There's also some pretty big issues with the animation that a lot of people have picked up on. Understandably, an episodic TV show isn't going to have all the detail of a comic book because it requires a lot more time and production. We're talking about maybe hundreds of thousands of frames per episode, and that's not including any redraws. It's completely impossible for a TV show to maintain that level of quality from the comics unless they're willing to extend the hiatus between seasons and put more money into it, which is simply not possible because they wouldn't be able to find a compromise for that. It's a pretty big problem because Invincible is an action show, and the lack of expression in the animation results in less action. There's a lot of times where the characters and the environments feel really stilted, which can really take you out of the atmosphere in spite of the really good writing. And with how fast they've been putting out these seasons, I don't see that problem being fixed anytime soon. Invincible has had its share of highs and lows these last 2 seasons, which can sort of reduce the lasting power it was given in its first season, and it's really important they improve on these things with how much of the story is left to adapt. There's some really interesting storylines going on, like Ellen being part of a resistance fighting off Filtrum, or Mark trying to raise Oliver to be a responsible hero, or Nolan being put on the run after betraying his race. There's a lot of potential for what can happen next, but also a number of ways it can go wrong. So season 4 will have a lot to live up to. But in spite of all this, there was one solitary element from season 3 that managed to bring back that sense of adrenaline and exhilaration that's been missing for a while. An event so colossal in scale compared to anything we've seen so far, with an aftermath that looks like it's bringing the series back to that unique direction from season 1. Of course, I'm talking about the epic showdown between Invincible and Conquest. This was the moment that so many fans have been waiting for. A battle that would push Mark to his very limits against a seemingly undefeatable opponent. This battle has so many elements that made the final battle of season 1 so fantastic. The stakes are skyrocketed, the violence is enjoyably gruesome, the dynamic between the hero and the villain is incredible, the development of Mark's character is very well done, and the aftermath shakes the series to its core in a way that builds so much anticipation for what's coming up next. Even the way it starts gets your blood pumping as it's in the aftermath of another battle that just occurred. It puts an incredible amount of pressure on Mark from the get-go because it doesn't even give him a chance to properly recover and process the Invincible War. Conquest arrives at the worst possible time and Mark doesn't even get a chance to properly prepare himself for the situation. But Conquest doesn't care about how Mark feels. He just wants to fight. And Mark is actually itching for one. He doesn't try to talk it out or give us that whole "we don't have to do this" thing. He just wants to punch something as hard as he can. It really shows how Mark is starting to become a lot more quick to action compared to previous seasons, not trying to get out of it by talking down the villains. But the aura Conquest emits throughout the entire introduction gives you chills down your spine. From the moment his shadow looms over Mark, it sends all sorts of signs that he's not messing around. It signifies the enormous skill gap between him and Mark, letting you know very early on how threatening he is. There's also some really good voice acting by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, making the character sound so subtle and scary at the same time. He sounds just like how you'd expect this kind of character to sound. Really scruff and battle-hungry. You can tell from the tone that he's been through a lot of messed up shit and relishes in it. And a really scary thing we know about Viltrumites is that they live for thousands of years, and they get stronger with age. So when you see a Viltrumite that looks this old, you can tell he's someone with supreme power, and he's participated in countless battles over his lifetime. The scar over his head, his fake eye, his messed up teeth. This is a battle-hardened warrior raised and bred by violence. He looks and sounds ancient by the standard of Viltrumites, and given what we already know about them, that is a recipe for disaster. A sadistic, world-conquering mass murderer who lives for the brutality of his battles. And the way he whispers good when Mark states his resistance is really sinister. You feel the excitement he's getting at the thought of a worthy battle, where he's allowed to do whatever he wants. But he also sounds genuinely impressed and pleased with Mark's desire to fight. The expression on his face and the oozing of satisfaction coming from Conquest in that moment, it was practically music to his ears. He was probably thinking to himself, maybe there's a chance you'll earn my respect. Now show me what you got. Given his other encounters with the Viltrumites, they probably told Conquest that Mark is a weakling who tries to worm his way out of a fight. So this side of Mark must have been a pleasant surprise to him. At first he sounds like a disappointed parent berating Mark for not cleaning his room. And when Mark announces his desire to fight him, he feels somewhat proud. Like he knows that a true Viltrumite stands his ground. Even the simple way they fly at each other and clash hooks you into the fight you're about to watch, as it shows just how brutal it's gonna get. The beastly roar that Conquest lets out is so raw. It makes him sound like a lot more than just a soldier or a warrior. This man is a straight-up killer. He sounds so commanding and primal in this one lunge towards Mark, and everything he does after is a one-way ride to pain. I especially like how they changed up some of the dialogue from the comics, where he just dumps a bunch of exposition on his reputation. Here he just says, "I'm your last chance to fulfill your duty." It's way more threatening and a great example of show don't tell, holding off on the exposition and letting us see what Conquest is capable of. And we certainly see what he's capable of, as the level of violent content throughout this fight is completely off the charts. When Anissa said she was praying for Mark to come to his senses before Conquest arrived, she wasn't kidding, because he delivered on how horrifying and scary he is. This makes the end of Season 1 look like a pillow fight. Conquest is so unforgiving and relentless as he does all sorts of bodily harm to Mark, crushing his limbs, snapping his bones, demolishing his hands and feet. It's far more gruesome than anything Nolan did to him. And it's not just the stuff he does to Mark, it's also what he does to even Oliver. He punches Oliver so hard that it causes him to vomit blood in all his teeth, and he tries to slowly rip him in half while describing the unbearable pain. He crushes Eve's jaw with one punch, and disembowels her with a single thrust into her stomach, and they hold on to how horrifying these injuries are. And the sound design makes it even more gruesome. When those sound effects play, you really feel how intense this is. The leaking of blood being spilt on the ground, the crunching of every broken bone, the ruptures of twisted and exposed organs. It's nothing short of disgusting, but in all the right ways. This is exactly what made the Season 1 finale so pulse-pounding while making you feel on edge. The gore and level of violence is effectively shocking while serving a narrative purpose. It shows the mortal terror that Conquest instills wherever he goes. He's not like any of the others we've seen so far. This is a Viltrumite who cannot be reasoned with. He's not even here to persuade Mark. He's here to conquer and destroy. And he's extremely commanding in his attitude throughout the battle. Nolan was partially holding back because he didn't really want to kill his son, and he wanted to demonstrate a point about how fragile and insignificant humanity is. Conquest just wanted a good fight. Even if Mark was in the process of preparing Earth for the Empire, he still would have done something to egg him into a fight. He even admits that he doesn't care about the Empire or his mission. He wanted Mark to resist so he would have an excuse to fight, because it thrills him to no end to find a worthy opponent, and was hoping that Mark would provide that for him. The final battle of Season 1 explored Viltrum's influence on Nolan, and how it indoctrinated him into this mindset he was using to justify all the terrible things he was doing. Nolan was conflicted in trying to convince himself as much as Mark before ultimately surrendering to his humanity. The Season 3 finale explores the absolute messed up psychological state of Conquest from the thrill he gets from battle. There's no deeper reason behind what he's doing. He's just a cold-blooded killer who believes the only thing bringing purpose in his life is violence. Every second this character is on screen, he just gets more and more disturbing. That opening monologue is all you need to know about him while setting the ground for how much more abhorrent he gets. He states that he enjoys this, how he's only here for the glory of the battlefield. And the tone he uses is so snake-like it gets unnerving. He's not saying this because he's trying to scare Mark. He doesn't even sound manic or intimidating while saying it. He's simply stating a fact about himself to his opponent, casually letting Mark know that this is normal for him. And as we get further into the episode, the events will make this monologue even more unsettling. It deeply mirrors and parallels the motivations behind someone like Nolan and Conquest. Nolan was following the code of honor for the Empire, acting in duty and preserving the traditions of their dictatorship. There was nothing personal in anything he did because he believed it was for the greater good. Conquest is much more sadistic, and his actions reek of malice. Everything he does is extremely direct and personal. He's completely aware of his surroundings and chooses to be a bloodlusting monster. Unlike Nolan, Conquest is a lot more self-aware of how brutal and horrible the Viltrum way of life is. He knows what he's doing is harmful to others, and that's exactly why he loves it. It gives him an excuse to fight. Battle is just his favorite pastime, and anything that allows him to relish in bloodshed makes him feel excited. He's not even giving Mark a chance to surrender, because he's having too much fun to stop himself. And it's definitely made clear when he's brought to the edge of the Earth's atmosphere. As he stares down Mark, he blows a bubble out of his blood and shapes it into a heart as it freezes. That single gesture is so terrifying and emblematic of how deeply disturbed this man is, showing Mark how much he's loving this. He's actually getting turned on by this fight, and the fact that he did this so effortlessly is extremely unsettling. Like, it makes you wonder how many times he's done this before, expressing to his opponent the love he feels from the thrill of battle, just to further toy with them before continuing to torture them. His sadism and bloodlust are perfectly represented in this one small moment, making him even scarier than before. And the way he puts him into a chokehold and tries to gently comfort him while wiping the blood off his face is so sinister and discomforting. He's trying to encourage Mark so he can play with him a little longer, just treating him like a pet. This pep talk where he tells him that he still has a chance is really creepy, like he just wants to keep Mark alive because he provides him with a challenge. He's actually congratulating him for taking it like a champ. That is a really unsettling way to treat your opponent in a deathmatch. Even the way he just allows Mark to land some hits on him is really devious. He's shaking off the pain through the sheer acceleration he's getting from the battle, almost like he likes the pain for being part of the battle. And when Oliver shows up to help, it gets far more menacing. He slaps Mark away and proceeds to brutalize Oliver, then grabbing him and slowly ripping him in half while describing every minute detail of the pain. We all know that Conquest is thousands of times stronger than Oliver. He could have easily killed him in an instant. But no, he wanted this kid to experience as much pain as possible, making him feel every agonizing detail of being ripped in half as he describes it to him. Do you know how insane you have to be to toy with your victim like this? Making them feel unbearable pain while explaining in clear graphic detail the full description of what it's like to be torn in half? There is no other word for it except demonic, and Conquest is just relishing in his tears. Even by Viltrum standards, he's completely unfeeling and savage, savoring the moment for his own pleasure. Mark manages to stop him only to be immediately stopped. The way Conquest just breaks the aerial momentum and stops them after getting tackled by Mark is sheer intimidation. It really demonstrates the difference in power between them. Even when Mark stops holding back, he's still no match. A really insane demonstration of his might. But if that wasn't scary enough, the beach scene definitely was. We already knew how grotesque and sociopathic Conquest was, but there has to be something that really tops how sadistic he is. And he does this by using Mark to bulldoze through an entire city block of people. It's basically a follow-up to the train scene from season 1. But something about it just feels more disgusting. When Nolan used Mark as a tool to slaughter people in the subway, it was indeed an act of evil, but it felt like there was a point to it. Nolan did it as part of his lecture to show Mark the frivolous and fragile nature of the human race and how insignificant they are in the grand scale, demonstrating how pointless it is for them to resist and how the best option is to subject themselves to the Viltrum Empire. This was not that. This was random, pointless murder that Conquest engaged in just because it would give him a good laugh. Just relishing in the suffering of others because it amuses him. Deeply and unsettlingly horrific. And what makes it even worse is that half the time Conquest and Mark didn't even touch anyone. They were simply flying at such a high speed that the air current just slashed them to pieces. You have to be traveling at Mach 5 speed to have that much velocity, and we know that Viltrumites can scale entire planets in a matter of seconds. This has to be less than 1% of Conquest's top speed. So knowing that he could have gone a lot faster but chose not to just to savor the moment is extremely barbaric. But what may be even sadder is how Mark quickly recovers from this. At this point, he's so desensitized to the constant gore and death that he's starting to feel unfazed by it. Honestly, it speaks volumes of what he's been through. And just when you think they may have a chance of winning when Eve shows up, Conquest immediately dashes all those hopes away. He shatters Mark's femur, sending him falling, leaving Eve to face him alone. She does manage to put up a short fight, making her more formidable compared to the comics. Unfortunately for her, Conquest is out of her league. He quickly blows her jaw off with a single punch, and impales her using his hand as a blade. And the scary thing about this is that Conquest wasted no time killing Eve. It makes you realize a disturbing detail about the battle. When fighting Mark, Conquest seems to be taking his time with him, wanting to play around with him before getting too serious. But with Oliver and Eve, Conquest wastes no time going for the kill. It's a really sadistic contrast between how he views Mark and how he views his allies. Conquest feels a sense of fascination with Mark, otherwise he wouldn't put so much time into taunting him. But with Oliver and Eve, he just views them as disposable earthlings. Everything around him that isn't a Viltrumite is just an object he uses to torture Mark, an instrument he uses to provoke him into unleashing his Viltrumite rage. He knows the emotional and mental turmoil he's placing on Mark, and every moment spent with him is just taking his sweet time slowly pushing him to a breaking point. And he does exactly that when Mark is begging and pleading for Eve to stay alive while he calls for Cecil. This is easily the most horrifying and saddening moment in Mark's life so far. The love of his life is brutally battered and seconds away from dying, and the only person he can rely on is the person he scorned and loathed the previous day. The voice acting here is fabulous. It really shows how Stephen Young was the best possible choice to voice Mark. He has so many swirling emotions while trying to comfort Eve and call for Cecil. Pure desperation, fear, denial, depression, shock, and rage. Every delivery coming from him in this moment is so deep and authentic. It really captures the idea of a frightened teenager trying to save their significant other who was just seriously injured. It helps to make the scene more heartbreaking and traumatizing. Eve is one of the most important things in Mark's life, and he's willing to turn to Cecil, a man who he strongly disagrees with, to try and save her. Just try to really imagine how this situation is weighing down on him. All of the pressure, stress, and pain he was under in this moment is overwhelming, and the facial expression adds to how haunting it is. In spite of how badly he's been beaten and all of his facial injuries, he still manages to have that look of horror. You can hear the pain in his voice and the terror on his face as he tries to save Eve. His despair is purely palpable and horrific, and it also adds a bit of nuance to his relationship with Cecil. Mark calls for him because he values his ability to help people in a life or death situation far more than any sort of grudge he holds against him. In spite of the bad blood between them, he's still calling for his help because he knows he's the only one who can help when he can. It's actually horrifyingly sad, seeing Mark call for Cecil like a kid screaming for his mom and dad to rescue him in spite of how much he hates him. He turned to a man he hated in a moment of complete hopelessness. It's actually really tragic because we see how slowly the relationship between them broke down over 3 seasons. Cecil always did a lot for Mark's family, and in spite of his unethical actions, he always wanted what was best for them. After everything they did to help each other, it's pretty heavy seeing Mark feeling betrayed and wanting nothing to do with him anymore. But in spite of not being on good terms, Mark still trusted Cecil with Eve's life. He's learning to see more gray aspects of the world instead of just seeing everything black and white. And it also shows how much he loves Eve, prioritizing her survival over everything else. When she first appeared to save him, he had so much fear and anxiety rushing through his head. He knew that she was no match for Conquest and she was gonna get brutalized, so he desperately tries to buy her time to escape. And it also shows how Eve is reciprocating Mark's love for her, putting her life on the line in a fight she knows she can win. She fought bravely and fiercely in spite of how outmatched she was, but she also includes more ingenuity in her powers. She keeps Conquest distracted and disoriented, trying to buy Mark time to heal and recuperate. She creates a suit of armor to prevent her limbs from being broken, and she experiments with her abilities like trying to confuse his movements with water or using projectiles to keep him at a distance. She actually puts up more of a fight against Conquest than the Guardians did against Nolan. If this is how she fought in the Invincible War, she could have defeated a few Marks on her own. It also greatly expands her role from the comics. She actually puts up a fight instead of just getting one shot, but alas, she was no match for him. And Mark begging for her to not die is a huge punch to the gut. And we're not even given a moment to process the horror alongside Mark as Conquest comes to gloat him more, while licking Eve's blood and announcing how delicious it is. Wow. Every time this man is in the frame, I need to pause the episode and take a deep breath. He never fails to make you feel uncomfortable, and he follows it up with a speech that really cements how far off the deep end he is, further gloating Mark, telling him he doesn't even care about the Empire and how engaging in all this death and destruction was an immense joy. He even brings up how he normally doesn't get to do this because of the regulations of his missions, but now that he's allowed to take over Earth by any means necessary, he gets to use this as an excuse. Everything Conquest says here is bone-chilling as hell. Not because of his perverse mentality, not because of the scary sadism, not because he enjoys the slaughter he commits, not even because he gets to torture Mark some more. This unholy wretch is having the time of his life and is allowed to do whatever he pleases with no restraints and reverence. The scene where he formed that heart out of his blood is so much more horrifying with this speech in mind. This entire day of mindless slaughter is the most fun he's had in thousands of years. He would be crying tears of joy if he didn't think that emotion was a form of weakness. This is all just a paid vacation to him and he's making the most of it. And Mark's response to this is one of the coldest lines of dialogue ever uttered in any superhero media.
I don't care how strong you are. I don't care how fast you are. I can see the future. You don't live to see tomorrow.
This line of dialogue is so intimidating and cathartic. It's equal parts scary, badass, and tragic. This is a threat by someone who just lost the love of his life and is about to cut loose on the one responsible. And you feel the emotion behind it with Stephen's masterful delivery. All that quiet rage that's barely being held back as Mark stares Conquest down with killing intent written all over his face. It's so much more intimidating that he doesn't yell it out or shout at the top of his lungs, just saying it like a quiet threat while keeping that ferocious eye contact with his enemy. It's exactly how I imagine him saying that while reading the comic, and he says this while while underneath his enemy, with Conquest continuing to look down on him. In spite of being completely outmatched and on his last legs, backed into a corner, Mark still doesn't give in and keeps pushing forward with determination to defeat him, those grieving tears for Eve slowly turning into tears of utter hatred and rage against Conquest. Nothing at this point can contain the depths of hate in his eyes. At this point, Mark stopped caring about his moral code. He knows that he needs to sacrifice the beliefs he held onto for so long to stop this monster, with the ground punch being a symbol of how he's going to give it everything he's got. And I absolutely love how Mark doesn't feel that way to protect people. Mark wants him dead because he thought he just killed Eve. This is no longer about morals or a need to protect. This is sheer rage and a burning desire to kill. An incredible breakthrough in Mark's mind. None of that cringy moral code nonsense you would see from Batman and Superman. Mark is through messing around, and he's going to kill this tyrant. This was something that Mark needed to learn, how he's gonna face enemies that are too dangerous to be left alive. He needs to be ruthless to prevent any more needless carnage and even have a chance at defeating Conquest. And the next several moments of the fight show how Mark is absolutely no longer holding back. He lunges at Conquest and they clash so hard that it completely shatters his gauntlet while shattering all the bones in his right hand. Shattering the gauntlet alone is a monumental achievement for Mark, considering how up to this point, nothing in the fight was even leaving a dent in it. This gauntlet had to be made with material a lot denser than anything on Earth, and Mark just obliterated it with a single strike. The adrenaline he was feeling in that moment finally kicked in, allowing him to unlock an enormous level of strength. This is what Mark is capable of when he stops holding back, and it's absolutely stunning. And then he just keeps throwing himself at Conquest until he's locked in a bear hug. But even that doesn't stop him as he proceeds to take a huge bite out of his shoulder, ripping off a piece of his flesh with just his teeth. Conquest is shaken by the pain and forced to throw Mark off him, holding on to his wound as it actually hurt him. This is how blinded by fury Mark is right now. He just broke his own arm, and instead of taking a moment to reel from the pain, he immediately throws himself at Conquest. Mark no longer cares about the pain he's in or the severity of his broken limbs. All he was focused on was killing Conquest, and the chunk he takes off a Conquest's shoulder makes it even better. This is the first time in the entire battle that Conquest was actually hurt. Everything else up to this point was a light breeze or an inconvenient slap. But now he's caught off guard from how much pain he's in from this attack. That shoulder bite showed him that Mark was actually capable of doing permanent damage. It's the first time in the entire battle that Conquest takes him seriously as a threat. His cockiness up to that point was really condescending, never thinking of Mark as anything but a harmless insect. And that cockiness immediately fades away when he rips that piece of his shoulder off his body. He sees now that Mark isn't just trying to stop him, he's trying to kill him. It deeply changes the mood of the entire fight from this point forward. Conquest isn't fighting some pest anymore. He's fighting another Viltrumite. Mark at this point has been so badly beaten and thrown around, having lost Eve and broken most of his limbs. But he doesn't wallow in sorrow and give up. He just charges full force into his opponent with zero fear of his well-being. This is how you know the real fight has started. And as the two continue to fight, Mark actually gets the upper hand and pins Conquest down while repeatedly beating him with his good fist. But his animosity comes to a stop when he's distracted by a mysterious pink flash. Surprised to see that somehow, Eve is recovering from her injuries. But Conquest takes advantage of that distraction to chokehold Mark into the ground. And then we get the most messed up scene in the entire episode. You'd think at this point nothing can top what we've already seen. But this right here just seals the deal. While holding down Mark, Conquest starts to give soft whispers into his ear, confessing his deepest insecurities. Now this is something a lot of people talked about already, and there's honestly so much to unpack here I'd have to give it its own separate video. But the psychoanalysis this little monologue gives Conquest paints him in a really scary new light, telling Mark all of his deepest secrets about having no purpose in life except being a weapon for the Viltrum Empire, and how it corrupted him over thousands of years. His reputation as the Empire's conqueror left him isolated with no one wanting anything to do with him, feared and outcasted by his own kind. And what makes it even more disturbing is how self-aware Conquest is of the situation. He describes his own actions as atrocities as if he knows what he's doing is wrong, and how he can't even force himself to feel any emotion because it's been so deeply integrated into his brain. And Mark spends the entire monologue looking at him like, "Why are you telling me all this?" Like he's scared and confused as to why this bloodlusting psycho is opening up to him about this stuff. Even the music is so eerie and calculated as it perfectly captures the unsettling nature of the situation. It adds a really sinister tone as we peek into the sadistic mind of a mass-murdering psychopath who was rendered insane from the massacres he was bred to commit. It's soft and gentle, yet it hits so many unnerving notes that represent how unstable he became. The low stirring strings and woodwinds combined with these distorted piano-like sounds blend incredibly well with the soft tone in Conquest whispers, and most of it is done while focusing on his fake eye, symbolizing how empty he feels. Mark is probably the only person he's ever said any of this to, seeing him as worthy enough due to his strength. But it also shows how insecure he is about these feelings. He whispers it like he's afraid of anyone besides Mark hearing it, desperately trying to keep his secret from getting out. It feels weird at first considering there's obviously no one else around to hear it, but then Conquest follows it up with "take it to your grave." That is absolutely fucked. This is like a serial killer confessing their deepest emotions to their victims before killing them. The only reason he told Mark any of this was because he believed he was about to die, so confident that he's about to kill him that he doesn't see a problem with revealing these things about himself. Treating this like some sort of therapy session, he treats Mark like a lifeless corpse who can't talk back, someone who can't object to anything he's saying so he'll feel reassured about these beliefs. But in a really twisted, messed up way, this is the only social interaction he's had in thousands of years. He was impressed by Mark's willpower and vitality on top of being the only one to actually give him a good fight for the longest time. So he sees him as someone who's worthy of knowing these feelings. But at the same time, it's all just a final attempt to torture him before the kill. No one will ever know his secrets, because Mark won't be alive to tell them. Everything about this monologue is straight up vile, but it also paints Conquest in a somewhat tragic light. Not sympathetic, but it makes everything he does make shockingly more sense. And you wonder how differently he could have turned out if he was treated as anything other than an instrument of war. It's an incredible subversion of the trope where a villain would monologue, where instead of just mocking the hero or ranting about how right he is, he just starts whispering his deepest insecurities into the ears of his nemesis, doing so as a way to reassure Mark that he has no intention of letting him live after passing this knowledge. I really do have to give this scene its own separate analysis video because there's just too much to go into here that would distract from the fight itself. But with that said, this scene truly cemented Conquest as one of the most terrifying villains in comic book history. He was here for like half the runtime of a single episode, and it feels like he was the main villain of the entire series. Every moment he's on screen, he pushes your boundaries and just gets more unsettling and disgusting. The way he relishes in all the evil he commits throughout the episode, doing everything in his ability to get under Mark's skin, the sickening way he describes people as toys for his amusement, the absolute fucked up way he whispers his insecurities to Mark, it is an unfathomable height of villainy, and you really get the impression throughout the entire episode that nothing can stop him. Like, if he took his job seriously and went for the heart like Thrag, he would have won. And that's actually a sort of poetic irony to his defeat. The reason he lost was because of his own hubris while relishing in his ego, but the writers take the time to frame it in a believable way, showing us how he was ultimately groomed by the Viltrum Empire to be nothing but a tool for destruction, and how that view of him deteriorated his mind to the point that now he thinks his only purpose in life is violence, because for his entire life it was the only thing he was ever allowed to understand. It's a really good way to portray him as a tragic figure without trying to make him look sympathetic or redeemable. As he chokes the life out of Mark, Eve manages to land a powerful energy blast, evaporating his skin and severely damaging him. Like I said before, the poetic irony in Conquest's defeat is how he spends so much time relishing in his sadism that it made him lose focus. He criticizes Mark for not paying attention when he himself spent too much time taunting him to pay attention. And even that wasn't enough to put him down. That is nuts. As Conquest threatens to make sure Eve stays dead this time, Mark lunges at him one last time with his left hook, but Conquest stops it and crushes Mark's last good limb. And with no options left, Mark can only do one thing: use his head. Now, I don't want to spoil this particular moment for anyone who hasn't seen it yet. I really do think it's too good to spoil, and it's more fun to see it for yourself. But believe me when I say that Mark repeatedly bashing his skull into Conquest's face until it's nothing but a blobby paste was absolutely glorious. It was without question the absolute perfect way to conclude this brutal balls-to-the-wall fight with Conquest. The adrenaline rushing through Mark's body as he puts all of his remaining might into silencing Conquest for good is so cathartic and satisfying, and the primal voice acting from Steven is stunningly powerful. His unbridled fury towards Conquest is so raw, and the hazy gasps for air when he's done is mesmerizingly haunting. He really put every last ounce of his being into those headbutts, and only stopped after he was sure Conquest was dead. It was so beautiful and therapeutic after all the fucked up shit that happened to him. And after it's all over, Mark can only fall to the ground exhausted, putting an end to this insane battle. There's a lot of ways in which this could very well be the greatest fight in Western animation. Everything about it from start to finish is purely raw and exquisite. The first thing to note is how well the fight is animated. It really went above and beyond in displaying the brutality of this fight. There's so many dynamic camera movements that capture the scope and range of the intensity, and it's edited very well, allowing you to experience and feel all the action that occurs. There's a very clear escalation of force and brutality that enhances the danger, creating all sorts of tension for Mark and his environments. You feel the force of every punch, the size of every shockwave, the overwhelming scale of the citywide destruction, and the sound design is so crisp and rough. The sound mixing combined with the animation really sells this as a fight between gods, with very well contained impact and fight choreography. And aside from the action, the character writing is top-notch. Exactly the kind of quality you remember from the end of Season 1. Conquest alone is such a joy to watch. I could just spend the entire video focusing on him and that would be enough to sell how entertaining this was. But the other characters are well handled too. Oliver's bravery and willingness to stand up to Conquest in spite of clearly being outmatched is really admirable. Eve provides some good backup and I really love how they actually made her put up a fight. But the biggest leap in character was definitely by Mark. This is beyond anything he's dealt with so far. The enemy that out of everyone he's faced so far pushed him into a corner and forced him to tap into his true power. Mark is capable of immense power, but he's always holding back because he doesn't want to kill. But whenever he taps into that power, it's always because of his loved ones. In Season 1, he was able to knock back Nolan after he claimed his mom was worthless. In Season 2, he went all out against Engstrom when he threatened Debbie and Oliver. And now he goes ballistic on Conquest after he thought Eve was dead, and when he threatened to execute her. People argue that Mark has an edge against Filtermites because of his human side giving him adrenaline, but that's just a headcanon made up by fans. In all three examples I went over, Mark stopped truly holding back when his family was either threatened or put in immediate danger. There have been instances where he got angry, but nothing that really allowed him to tap into that Filtermite strength. The only thing on his mind is this person is threatening my family and is overcome with a desire to kill. But there's something about killing Conquest that makes this so unique compared to the other times Mark tapped into this power. In spite of his rage, there was still a sense of his being mixed in there which resulted in him feeling vulnerable. Obviously he still cared about Nolan and after he thought he killed Engstrom he immediately regretted it. But there was none of that with Conquest. He was pushed to the breaking point and was mad as humanly possible, put through physical, mental, and emotional agony unrivaled by anything else he's experienced. And even above that, he was pushed to the limits of his will to survive, reverting to a savage animal who wasn't even conscious of his own rage. It's a real testament to Mark's namesake, how his willpower is what makes him invincible. In spite of being completely outmatched by Conquest, he never backed down and kept forcing himself to push back. But this time that determination came with bloodlust. He had to brutalize his own body in some cases just to deal any meaningful damage, and even then it was barely enough. It actually puts in perspective how much more powerful he's gotten since Season 2, or even Season 1. Not only that, but he also implemented more battle experience in this fight. He uses concentrated attacks and targets vulnerable spots on Conquest's body instead of just using brute force. It's just so shocking to see how ferocious and vigorous Mark became in this fight. You're watching a teenager with a naive view on the world gradually transforming into a bloodthirsty killer. The battle ended with him so guttural and animalistic that it's far beyond not holding back. He was like a cornered prey forced to go savage on the predator, resorting to using his skull as a weapon in absolute hate and desperation. Conquest wanted his Filtermite heart and he gave it to him. It really feels like he was letting out 3 seasons of emotional baggage and crashed out like never before. All from the love he felt for Eve. This is what makes Mark one of the most powerful fighters in the show. He will fight tooth and nail to defeat the most powerful and ruthless villains to protect his loved ones. The amount of punishment he took in this episode to defeat Conquest is totally insane. It's also the most purely authentic fight between a hero and a villain because Mark defeats Conquest as he is. No cliche power-ups, no inner demons, no power of friendship, no super transformation, just the indomitable human spirit hitting back harder and harder. It makes his victory over Conquest feel deserved because he really earned it. And it's made even better in the aftermath when Mark discards his outdated moral code. One of the first things he does when regaining consciousness is ask Cecil where Conquest is, wanting to know for absolute certainty that he was dead. And when he sees the body, he orders Cecil to burn it. And at the end of the episode when he consoles Oliver, he renounces his no-kill rule, vowing to kill anyone who threatens to kill his family. Finally, after all this time, Mark is getting with the program. The most important thing about this is that he stops blaming himself for the deaths of the civilians in that fight. He did everything in his power to stop Conquest. And now that he's actually seen what he's up against, he knows what he has to do. Mark's enemy wasn't a close family member or someone who can be persuaded with words. Conquest was a sick animal who was completely self-aware of what he was, and he wasn't gonna stop until he was put down. If these are the lengths Filtrum will go to enslave Earth, Mark needs to stop holding on to his frivolous moral code. And it's especially well done that it's Conquest that makes Mark realize this reality. Before, he was desperate to value all life, to prove to himself he was nothing like his father. But you can't apply that logic to terrorists like the Viltrum Empire or Engstrom or the Muller twins. These were active threats to the world who can't simply be locked up in a prison. But it wasn't until Conquest showed up that Mark was able to register this. Conquest was a man without reason, a man who believed in nothing except violence and death. He was the teacher Mark needed to understand when to stop holding on to an outdated ideology. He finally got through to him. All that desperation to value all life when the villains took it for granted was wiped away, and the circumstances surrounding this realization are very well done. Mark being forced to kill when he himself isn't a mass-murdering psycho is an important step in his growth because it was something he needed to learn. He has to face the reality that this isn't the bright superhero life he hoped for, and there's nothing he can do to change that no matter how hard he tries. He himself has to change and adapt or die, which is highlighted with the way they showed Conquest's brutalized head. At the end of Season 2, they didn't show Engstrom's head to focus on how guilty Mark felt for killing someone, but this time they showed the remains of the villain he killed because he felt no guilt for killing Conquest. It demonstrates the shift in Mark's ideology because before he didn't want to face violence and the consequences of it, but now he's willing to. It is true that life is valuable, and it's exactly why certain villains who don't value it should be killed. They simply need to die before they cause more harm. Now obviously this doesn't mean Mark should just kill everyone who does something bad. He should kill people who present themselves as an active threat to the world or are just plain evil. Unlike a lot of other superhero media, Invincible has a strong emphasis on the innocent people who die. It's the realistic consequences of battles between beings with Superman-level strength, and Mark thinks about how he has to prevent more of that happening in the future. This is easily the best and most important episode in the show so far, not simply because of the fight with Conquest, but because it challenges Mark in a way that he's never been challenged before. He wasn't just forcing himself to push back against an impossibly powerful opponent, he was actually forced to confront his beliefs. He now understands what he must do to even the playing field, even if he has to give up on showing mercy. He wanted to maintain his image as a good person to be a role model to those around him, which caused him to ignore the necessity of what needed to be done. Not killing is ultimately a double-edged sword because it's important to maintain a sense of restraint to prevent yourself from becoming bloodthirsty and murder-happy. But when you have villains who do evil, unforgivable things and continue to escalate the conflict, the heroes need to stop obsessing over the virtue signaling of being better than that and put an end to these villains to prevent future suffering. Mark isn't broken or crossing a line here. He's showing us how he was never meant to be a traditional hero, because Invincible wasn't meant to be a traditional superhero story. It's so much more refreshing than the tired stuff we see in Marvel and DC comics regarding morality. It's simply better for a hero to kill a villain and permanently stop the damage they cause and just move on from them, than something like Batman locking up Joker and suffering for the millionth time. Mark isn't becoming an anti-hero, he's simply crushing the odds being stacked against him. It's actually pretty well set up with the end of Season 2 setting up this moral question. He saw what he could end up becoming if he didn't restrain himself and hold back, and he felt pretty disturbed by it too. He was really determined to reject the ruthless approach of his father, so when he thought he killed Engstrom, he faced a really deep crisis in himself. Did he really need to kill Engstrom? Was there a part of him that wanted to do it? Did he become everything he feared? Or was this something inevitable? Would he be prepared for the emotional baggage that comes with killing? How would he prepare himself for a Viltrum invasion if he can't handle it? It's clearly something that's become instinctive with the threat looming over Earth. But would Mark be able to make that choice when the time comes? The battle with Conquest helps him find the answers to all these questions. Whether he's prepared or not, it's something that he must do to defend the Earth. The Viltrum Empire isn't going to hold back, so neither should he. It's not something he's supposed to feel comfortable with but accept as part of his responsibility as Earth's defender. This is what Season 3 ultimately led itself into with all the conflicts Mark had to put up with. Cecil breaking his trust, Engstrom ruining his reputation, his disagreements with Oliver, all leading up to his battle with Conquest that changed his views. This is what makes Invincible vs. Conquest the greatest fight in Western animation, or at least top 5 material. It's a brutal battle that pushes the hero to the breaking point, culminating in a satisfying conclusion with no bullshit cop-out, leaving the hero to face reality and challenge their own beliefs, and breaking away from the status quo of its genre. It's certainly the most cinematic episode of the series so far, where the characters, plot, music, artistry, build up from previous episodes, and voice acting all flow together to create an atmosphere where every emotion is pure. It has so many enhancements from the comics, with so much of the fight being perfectly adapted from the panels. It makes Conquest a more complex villain, where he's a lot more professional in his sadism. The tone feels like something out of a horror movie. The disturbing imagery and how impure Conquest was made this come across as really unsettling. The ferocity of the voice acting adds so much to the brutality of the battle, intense and unforgiving with every delivery. It has 10 times the brutality that made the season 1 finale so iconic and then some, setting the ground for season 4 in the best way possible. They really did this storyline justice, taking what you thought would be as far as they can go and stretching it even further. It develops the hero in an important way while remaining faithful to how they were written previously. And now Mark has to face a new reality and we're left in anticipation to see if he's ready. Season 3 has been an up and down roller coaster of emotion, but they ended it on a very high note. And with the stage set for even more to come, it's gonna be a really long wait.